Welcome to the Habitat Podcast, the podcast for wildlife habitat management, hunting strategy, and land stewardship. And now, your host, Jared Van Hees.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Habitat Podcast. I'm your host, Jared Van Hees, and this is the podcast for becoming better habitat managers. Guys, as you hear me say all the time, thank you so much for tuning back into the podcast. We couldn't do it without you, and we just want to let you guys know that you're the reason we do this. We are just like you guys, normal, everyday, hardworking guys who get out there and try to make the best of their land. So keep following along, keep supporting us, and we'll keep providing great content for you guys. Thanks again for tuning in. Now, we have a special episode today, guys. Aaron Warbritton from the Hunting Public joined us. So if you guys have YouTube or Facebook, you've probably stumbled across the Hunting Public. A great group of guys we met and have definitely follow along with. They are also normal guys like you and me, and they get out there and they get after these whitetails. And we're talking all over the country. So we thought we'd get Aaron on, pick his brain with the habitat side too. So we're all hunters, but at the same time, I want to know what he sees in habitat when scouting, when hunting, and how we can all take that information, relate it to our upcoming fall, which may have started for some of you guys out in North Dakota. We're still about 3 weeks out here in Michigan, and it's coming real soon though. So I want to make sure we get him on and help you guys learn something, because we learned a bunch from this podcast. A couple things we like to cover in this episode. We talk about habitat diversity, what Aaron's looking for when he's scouting, the things that pop up that make him successful when he's looking for spots to hunt. We talk about cattails and hunting islands in the marsh. We talk about pine stands and pine bedding down in the south. We use that for an example throughout the podcast as one of our things we talk about. Stem count diversity. The amount of stems or woody browse or growth you see in a certain area and the density, how thick is the cover. We also talk about habitat edge, where a bunch of habitat edges maybe converge, can be a good spot to set up and scout. And then we also get into a story about how Aaron was able to hunt this great buck on his family Missouri farm based on the food plots he planted, the scouting he did, the pressure and when and where he went in to hunt. It's just an all-around great podcast, guys. We had a lot of fun with this one. Aaron's a great guy, and look forward to letting you guys listen to this here. Now, before we get into that, I do want to give you guys a couple updates. We are back pumping out videos on our YouTube channel. We put up about 4 more this week, along with a property tour series. So Brian went and toured our buddy Al's farm in Southeast Ohio, was able to put a video together, and we have some knowledgeable information on there for you guys. Check out Habitat Podcast on YouTube. We also have some farm updates about how Brian's farm and my farm looks on there. We're going to keep pumping those out, along with some hunting updates throughout the season. We're kicking around an idea of maybe trying to follow along with us, throughout this fall. Brian's going to be hunting Montana, Ohio, Pennsylvania. I'm going to be Michigan, Iowa, possibly Ohio. Al's jumping around a bunch too, so we want to maybe put that together too. Let us know your thoughts on that if you can. And then I want to thank our sponsors. We have HuntWise Hunting App, Michigan Whitetail Pursuit, Killer Food Plots, the Habitat Hook, Dip That Hydrographics, and Packer Max Cultipackers. And guys, lastly, before we get into the Hunting Public Aaron Warbritton podcast, I just wanted to thank you guys for the iTunes reviews you're leaving. I'm going to keep sending out these decals. I'm trying to find the people that are leaving these, and I'm shipping these decals out. The last couple reviews have been just amazing. I mean, really just make me feel really, really good and proud and happy, and just I'm so glad that you guys are enjoying this stuff as much as we are. The user who goes by JoeMama34, wrote the following. I have 13 outdoor whitetail hunting related podcasts. This one is hands down the best, and not because it isn't in good company. There are some other great podcasts out there, but they collect dust in my queue because I'm listening or re-listening to this one. I own 23 acres and live on it. When I listen to you guys, it's like listening to myself, although I concede you have more knowledge. When an expert speaker says something interesting and I think of a question, you guys ask it. When I think about equipment or small acreage limitations, you guys say it. As a relatively new hunter, I'm 38. I started at 31. I more than appreciate the podcast. Keep up the good work. Joe, that means a lot, man. We really are doing this to learn for us and for you guys. We're normal people, just like everybody else, and I feel like for what we've gotten through in the past 55 episodes, I've learned a ton, so I hope you guys do too. I appreciate the reviews. Brian does too, and we're going to keep going. So thank you once again for the great reviews, guys. Go ahead on iTunes, look up Habitat Podcast, write us a review, and I'll find you and ship you a brand new 5-inch HP decal. So without further ado, I know you guys are excited to listen to Aaron Warbritton from the Hunting Public. Let's get him on. Welcome back, everybody. Another episode of the Habitat Podcast. We have Aaron Warbritton on the line. How you doing tonight, Aaron?
Doing good, guys.
Good, man. Thanks for joining us tonight. Brian, you still there, buddy?
I'm here, ready to rock.
Rock and roll. Well, Aaron, we been wanting to get you on for a while now since we met at the trade show earlier this year. What you been up to since then, man?
Oh, been traveling all over the place all spring, turkey hunting, and we were gone there on the road pretty much for about two and a half months, and now we're back in the office trying to play catch up and get ready for the fall deer season.
Yes, sir. Aren't we all? How was your turkey season? I think I may have known from following along, but how'd it go for you?
Oh, it was pretty good. We got to see some cool new places and hunt with a lot of friends and family and stuff, and yeah, hard to beat springtime.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, we wanted to get you on here tonight. We talk a lot about managing habitat or what certain types of habitats out there on the lands that we hunt and scout, and wanted to start off here. We'd like to hear about who the guest is, where you're from, what do you do for a living, your background. You mind diving into that for us?
Yeah, sure. I'm originally from Northeast Missouri, a town called Paris, and most of my family is from that same general area in northern Missouri. I grew up hunting and fishing from a very, very young age. It's kind of been a tradition in both sides of my family, so it was not hard to get out in the woods when I was little. I had lots and lots of mentors, from my uncles to my dad to my cousins and other friends and so on and so forth, that I hunted with and learned a ton about it when I was a kid. And yeah, pretty much when I got up to be around 10, 11 years old, I started watching hunting movies on VHS and decided that was what I wanted to do, and just kind of started working towards it every year until I began doing it for a living in a certain sense when I was in my early 20s. So I was always intrigued with filming hunts and learning as much as we could about hunting and trying to help people. So
Now, do you remember what one of your first couple, I'm guessing VHS, deer hunting videos were way back in the day?
Oh yeah, I've probably still got the tapes running around somewhere. But oh yeah, we used to pack around. We saved up money after borrowing and ruining my aunt's camera a bunch of different times. We eventually got a more professional camera. Me and my cousin did, and just experimented with it. Filmed a bunch of turkeys getting shot in the spring, and then tried really hard for several years to get a whitetail hunt on film, and eventually did, but it was certainly difficult. However, that was when I was like 14, 15, 16 years old, and
Yeah.
that was a great learning experience at the time.
How many years did it take you to finally get that first whitetail kill on film?
Oh, I'm trying to think. man,
It took me
probably
3, so I'm
four,
curious what it takes a while to get it all to
probably
come together.
probably 4 or 5.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and there was lots of, near misses and
Oh
that
yeah.
sort of thing. But we
Perfect.
were trying to film and trying to learn how to hunt at the same time too. So it was a lot, just the circuits pretty well every time you went out, but a lot of fun, a lot of good memories.
So when did you transfer that into what would now become the hunting public? What direction did you can you remember, what point you thought that you want to take this somewhere further and start doing it for an audience?
Yeah, it was pretty much the only thing that I was interested in. I've been interested in sports and things like that, but hunting was always kind of at the peak, as far as my passions went. And I just worked slowly towards some sort of a career in that industry, and it just made sense because I'd been filming and editing videos all those years that I would pursue something in the video production side. So, to be honest, what the hunting public is now is what I've always been, and what the other guys that own it with me have always been. We're just average guys that seriously love to hunt. Like, we say that a lot. We're like, there's probably guys that are better hunters out there, there's better shots, but there's very few people that, love it as much as we do. It really is our lifestyle, and it always has been since I was a kid, like I mentioned. So it was kind of a natural fit as I began working for different businesses in my 20s, on the video production side. I kind of always wanted to, create some sort of a hunting brand or video series surrounding you're basically your average Joe, your regular guy hunt.
Right.
And that's sort of how the hunting public came about. So it wasn't just my vision, it's the guys that I'm working with now. We all just sort of aligned well from the beginning, and it was all something that we could identify with.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about just being regular guys, and that really comes across in your videos. And I think that's why you guys have gained such a great following, because you're doing what everybody out there can do. It's anybody can pick up one of your shows off of YouTube, and especially I love the one where you guys go to Walmart and buy a compound bow and get everything set up and get hunting in just one episode. Anybody can do that. So I think you guys are really making a connection there, and that's great to see. I appreciate it for sure.
Thanks.
So tell us about your family farm in Missouri that you grew up hunting on. I saw you mention that in a few episodes, and I've seen you even gone back and hunted there a few times. What was it like growing up hunting there?
Well, that's the place where I tracked my first deer with my dad when I was probably 4 or 5 years old. I can barely remember it. It's the place where I heard my first turkey gobble. It's the place where I, saw my first deer in the woods, saw my first rub, deer track. Not only is it the place where I harvested my first turkey and I harvested my first deer, but all of those experiences, that you remember when you were a kid, that was all there on that farm. And at the time, we weren't living up here. My dad had a job closer to St. Louis when I was a little kid as an engineer, and we would drive up on the weekends and just stay at my grandpa's house. But the farm itself, my grandpa Warbritton bought in the late 70s. And, pretty much just bought it as a financial investment and as an investment for his kids. My dad has got 3 brothers as well.
Okay.
And, at the time they were growing up and some of them were interested in the outdoors. So my grandpa decided to buy that farm. And ever since then, it's been in our family. And we not only hunted ourselves, but we let lots of local folks fish in our lake and hunt at different times of the season, on our property. My grandpa was the town doctor there in Paris, and a lot of people knew him real well for many years. I mean, he was the doctor there for, I don't know, long before I was born, when he came to Paris and took that job. But Paris is a small town. Like, he was pretty much the only doctor there. It was,
Wow.
there was 1,000 people in Paris and the surrounding communities. So everybody knows everybody. And yeah, that farm is pretty well, everybody in the community knows right where it is and has either hunted on it or fished on it at some point or another.
Oh, that's pretty neat. I wish I could say the same. We have that type of stuff up around me right now, but it's really, I think, commercialized a lot, and don't get a ton of family farms like that, at least where everybody kind of knows each other up by me anymore. So it's cool to hear, man.
Yeah, I'm very thankful that he bought that. That's like I said, I had a lot of good experiences there over the years, and I love going back there and hunting whenever I can.
So we're all we talk about is all this habitat stuff all the time now. So I gotta ask, what's the farm like? I mean, is it a big square? Is it a lot of ag? I mean, what's on the farm? What's it like?
Basically, a pretty even square, and there's no ag on it at all. Our lake is probably 3 acres in size. It's right up there by where the house sits on the west end of the property. And a gravel road borders it on the north and west side. And it's basically just a square with a couple of creeks running through it. A bigger block of timber on one side that's about 30 acres of timber, and then I would say it's 60 acres of pasture ground.
Okay.
And then some mixed timber right there below the house. It's just kind of thick and nasty that borders a creek that separates the two pastures.
Now, is that area, what's the, if you zoomed out, a couple miles, what's the area like in general? Is it more wooded, more ag, kind of a mix of both, prairie land?
Well, the majority of the counties that I'm from are ag land.
Okay.
And it's actually fairly flat ag land. I mean, growing up, I hunted, in my teenage years, I hunted a lot of ag farms where there were just fence rows and waterways and, little pockets of timber and little woodlots and stuff. But our farm right there on the west side of Paris is kind of a unique little area, and it's only, about 15 miles square. But there's actually quite a bit of timber in there and a little bit of rolling hills. And it's just right there in that pocket, and like I said, a lot of the other portions of the county are flat ag land. But right there in and around the farm, it's about a 600-acre block of what I would call timber with just mixed CRP fields in and around it with some creeks running through it. And quite a bit of it is mature timber, but there is some diversity in there, and obviously some good edge habitat with CRP and cedars mixed in and whatnot. But it's right there at the farm. It's what I would call bigger woods for our part of the world.
Okay. Yeah, that CRP sounds nice. I always love that. I mean, deer love that. That sounds good. A little bit of topography in there with some timber. That sounds nice, man. I mean, is the deer hunting and turkey hunting always been decent there, or what was it like, when you were growing up compared to now in terms of maybe numbers or age class?
It's kind of fluctuated here and there over the years, especially turkey hunting, but definitely with deer hunting as well. It's not a big buck property, and I say that just because I think we've been hunting it, our neighbors have been hunting it, that 600-acre square in there, because, we don't even have fences on our borders because we've known our neighbors since our neighbors are the same neighbors that we've had since my grandpa bought the place.
Wow.
like we know each other extremely well. And pretty well across the board, we haven't seen a buck, over Boone and Crockett in there, but maybe one time in my life. And there's bucks do get old back there and they get mature, but for the most part, it wouldn't be what I would call a trophy potential type of an area. I mean, we would need to do quite a bit of improvements and change the hunting pressure quite a bit to get that. But a real nice 3-year-old buck is a darn good buck back there. And they do get older. I mean, I've hunted deer that I knew were 6, 7, 8 years old back there, but for whatever reason, maybe it's the absence of ag, when they're just browsing in CRP and on acorns and stuff. I'm not real sure, to be honest, but just haven't really grown huge antler bucks back there.
Now, Aaron, you went back there last deer tour, just this past one you guys did. It was episode 29. I remember you having a pretty quick and a pretty awesome hunt there. You want to tell us about that hunt?
Yeah, I was actually planning on hunting public land right up the road with the rest of the crew, but they weren't going to get there until I think the 29th of October, and I got my work done for the day, and I was already back home. So I was like, I'm not just going to waste an evening. I was either going to go out to public land and scout, or I was just going to go right there at the farm. And I got to messing with something there at Dad's in the yard, and I looked at the time. I'm like, well, crap, I'm not going to have time to run out to public land. So I just threw my stand on and I went back there on the farm. I knew there was a couple bucks back there, that I would be tickled to shoot. So just went back there, and I was basically with the mindset of I was just going to walk the edge of that CRP in up towards where our food plot was and just follow that edge all the way back until I started cutting some scrapes and stuff. And then I would either set up there on those scrapes or I would push on into known bedding on past that. And as I got up there, probably 40 yards from where I killed the buck, I started cutting some fresher buck tracks in the food plot up there. And I got right there to that spot, and there's not always a scrape there, but it's pretty regular enough that I definitely wanted to check it out. And I looked at that scrape, and it had been worked like within the last day, and it was great big scrape. They'd been hitting it several times, and there was lots of buck tracks in there. And on a few occasions before, I've seen mature bucks and nice bucks using that food plot in the daylight, but they don't typically come out in the main part of it. They'd like to stay back in that lane. And there's a little bit of bedding right off the side of that thing. And I know at the time I knew Dad hadn't been in there for a couple months. So the deer hadn't been getting any pressure from our direction anyway. I mean, my neighbors had been in there hunting some, but on their property. So I found that big scrape in that fresh sign, and I was already running short of time. So I just popped up in the closest tree, and I said, well, if one comes that scrape, I'll shoot him. And if it doesn't, then I'll just sit up here and enjoy the night. And one happened to walk right in there and walk right to the scrape. And I was self-filming, and I could get the camera on him and get it set up and then get drawn and everything with him in the scrape because he was preoccupied. And that was the only deer that I saw.
Sure. Looked like you had to hold that draw for a little bit. That's a similar situation I had this past season too.
Yeah, I'm pretty particular about shot selection on them.
Right.
And he was quartering hard to me, and I probably could have blown it through there and it would have been fine, but I just wanted to, I knew he was preoccupied with that scrape, and if I just waited long enough, he was going to eventually turn and give me a little bit better angle.
Sure.
It just took a lot longer than I thought it was going to.
That was a great shot, and congrats on that buck.
Yeah.
Nice looking.
Thanks. I was pretty tickled with it. It was nice to have Dad up there, and my cousin Brandon, Me and Brandon have been attached at the hip since we were born. He's a year older than me, but he was the one that I was always hunting with. And I mean, before we could even legally hunt, both of our dads and our uncles would come to the house and grab us, and we would go on tracking missions and all kinds of stuff. We'd go out there and help them hang up tree stands and go shed hunt, and we'd even go and drive deer to them in gun season, and just when we were not when we were toddlers, but 5, 6 years old. So it was cool. It was nice to be home and get to share that experience with them.
So it's all about.
Yeah, there's just something about shooting a nice shooter buck on your own dirt, and I've only got to experience that once on my property. I've only owned it for a couple of years, and it's just nothing better in the world. And I have one quick gear question: arrow and broadhead that went through both those shoulders. What were you shooting?
5mm full metal jacket with 125 grain Exodus broadhead.
Got it.
Very nice.
Okay.
Aaron, you mentioned that buck was coming down a path to food plot, and you showed a little bit of that at the end of that opening there. Is that something you guys have been doing for a while, or is that something new that you guys have been doing with food plots there?
No, we've been putting one up there for a long time, since I was a kid. The first couple of years that I hunted the farm with Dad when I was very young, there was nothing up there. It was just CRP,
Okay.
and weeds and crap. But we eventually got my grandpa's old 2010 tractor fixed and was able to go up there and kill it up. And I think the first couple of years we planted milo, and there were so many trees around that just zapped the moisture, and it didn't do real well up there. We experimented with a number of different things. I mean, we planted biologic. I remember, and this is 20 years ago.
Okay.
So this is when the food plot craze was just starting to come on. So we were seeing all this advertisements for biologic and the big radishes they grew and everything. And we're like, wow, we got to get some of that, So we planted that in there for a few years and didn't have a lot of luck. And I think after about the 5th or 6th year, we started planting winter peas and wheat up there in what we call the gap. And that is just, your 10-yard wide gap that buck that you're talking about on that hunt came up.
Okay.
And that's just a lane that cuts down through the timber, and there's bedding areas on either side of it. And the deer are way more comfortable coming out in that lane because you can't see them from anywhere.
Right.
And we put another half acre to acre size food plot right out there in the opening at the end of the lane, but you can see that from the house. And that's where we get, turnips or beans or milo or something to grow better because it's out there in the middle of the field more so,
right,
where it's not having tree roots after moisture. But back there in that lane, we just pretty much plant wheat or some type of clover or winter peas every year. And that's kind of dual purpose. That in the springtime when that stuff comes back on after winter, the turkeys just love it.
Sure.
And we kill a lot of turkeys in that lane. And the deer love it also. I mean, it's just an attractant type food plot. And it doesn't grow particularly well in there, but, enough to help a little bit. We definitely have had success on it a number of times, shooting bucks and turkeys.
So
But I wouldn't say that's the best spot on the farm by any means for shooting a mature buck.
Well, before we get to that best spot, this lane, I'm trying to just paint a picture for the listeners here. Now everybody can go check out the Hunting Public 29, the Deer Tour, episode 29. You'll be able to see Aaron points it out in there a little bit better. But for us listening now, it's kind of like, how would you explain what that lane is? It's kind of like a spot where they feel secure prior to being out in the open in the food plot. It's closer to bedding, I assume, right?
Yep. It is. Think of the lane as kind of like a runway through the timber. They come out of their bedding areas onto that lane, and then they can look all the way down that lane and out into that main field in the main part of the food plot. So they can see deer. They can walk out of their bedding area where their vision is somewhat obscured, and they can stand in that lane and they can see a deer from 250 yards away out in the middle of that food plot. So, you know, an hour before dark, when there's a doe and 2 fawns up in the main part of that food plot eating turnips, we can see those deer from the house. There's probably other deer that are down that lane that we cannot see. And many times they will not come out there in that opening, that the field, the biggest area of the food plot, until after dark. And like I said, the lane's only about 10 yards wide, and it's probably 150 yards long.
Okay.
But it's just wide enough to get some sunlight to the ground right there.
Right.
To grow something in it.
Now, you mentioned those bedding areas along the lane. Is that something natural, or is that something that you guys have worked on?
No, that's natural, and they come and go. I mean, there's I wouldn't call any of them primary bedding areas where deer just use them day after day after day. It's just one of those deals where
bedding close to
they
food.
may be there, they may not be there. But if I'm up on that lane and I cut real fresh buck sign like that, it's worth hunting once, like I did last fall, because it's possible that deer is bedded within a couple hundred yards of that spot.
Okay. Now, when you guys put the food plot in, has that lane always been there, or is that something you guys carved out of there?
No, it's always been there.
Okay. And did you have a plan or any type of special layout for that food plot, or is it something you just took advantage of? I think I remember you mentioning better soils over there somewhere, or something like that.
Yeah, there's better soil that's out there in the opening, kind of towards the cap of the ridge, out off the end of the lane, you know, and that's the portion that we can see from the house.
Okay.
So that's the area where we plan a little bit wider, you know. I mean, it's a good half-acre square right there. But then we also sow a couple passes down that lane every year. We just plant different stuff in the lane. And that's all done. I mean, there was no plan, really. It was all just kind of trial and error through the years to see what grew best and to see, you know, what the deer and turkeys liked best. And we just seem to have had the best luck with wheat and winter peas in that lane. And then planting, whether it's beans or milo or turnips, any one of those, or even clover out in the main part of the food plot, all of those that we've had success with up there.
Okay.
Growing, just as long as we get far enough away from the timber edge.
Are you guys doing any other habitat improvements or any other projects on the farm?
Yeah, I mean, every once in a while we will burn that CRP, you know, and cut fire breaks in the edge of those fields and do a prescribed fire or some description. But and there's a lot of different things we could do with timber stand improvement and that sort of thing that we just haven't done. You know, I wouldn't say we've done a ton of improvements to it. We've cut invasive saplings out of that CRP quite a bit, you know, to try to make better habitat for like quail and that sort of thing. And we have had, when I was a kid, there was hardly any quail out there, and for the last 5-6 years, we've had a pretty good sized covey that lives on the property.
That's great.
But it's pretty minor. I mean, it's pretty minor stuff. Nothing too crazy.
Now, you were saying when you were going down that lane, you cut a fresh track, or I think it was a scrape you saw was worked up. So you figured that because you saw the fresh sign right there, that maybe a buck was using one of these satellite beds or non-primary beds for that time being, because it was so current, and then it's worth hunting once, is what you said at that point, right?
Yeah, and what I would do from that point forward is, if I wouldn't have had any luck on that sit, the very next time I went back there hunting, whether it was the next day or 3 days later or whatever, I would go back deeper to the next set of bedding.
Okay.
and I would, set up on precious sign, leaving that bedding area. But anytime if I'd have got up in that lane and I wouldn't have found fresh buck tracks and I wouldn't have found that fresh scrape, which I've done many times when I went up there and not found the sign that I wanted to in and around the lane, then I just blow right through it and I go past it. And I go to the next bedding area. And I know where most of the bedding areas are back there now, because I bow hunt on my neighbors too. I just call them ahead of time and ask them. They've never told me no, but we call them and we stay in constant contact with them all the time, just so they know who is where and so on and so forth. But I know where several of the bedding areas are on their properties as well, because obviously the deer. We have like 110 acres. They're not just going to live on our farm.
Right.
We live on all 4 of our neighbors too.
Right. No, and it sounds like, you learned that from just being there for years, hunting it, right? You've scouted it many times, you've hunted it, and you cut your teeth there, and you kind of know the property like the back of your hand.
Yeah, and I still learn a ton about it all the time.
That's
you just
awesome.
can't ever figure these places out. It's no different. Every piece of ground is the same, whether it's public or private. You got to know where the deer are bedding, where they're living. And in order to do that, you've got to scout it and hunt it and just spend time out there, try to figure out what's going on. And deer don't understand, the difference between public land pressure and private land pressure. It's the same exact thing. It's human intrusion. So that's what you're always looking at, is like, where do you access the property the most? Where is the most pressure coming from as far as human scent goes? And then you just hunt around that.
Now, do you guys, even on your family farm or any other private farms or even public spots that you guys hunt a good amount, do you have any fixed stands anymore, or are you strictly mobile?
We got set stands on the farm there at home, just because my family gun hunts a fair amount. And during gun season, they just like to set up in those stands,
Yep.
And that we may not hunt them until then. In most cases, there's nobody in that stand for, an entire year. So we still do have lots of set stands. When I was a kid, I built a lot of the same ones that are there with my dad.
Nice.
Out of 2x4s and whatnot, treated lumber when I was a kid, and they're all turnbuckled to the trees back there. We've got half a dozen of them across the farm. But if I'm going in there to kill a buck, I'm going in there with a stand on my back or a saddle or something.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of what
I shot that buck this last fall 10 feet from an old tree stand that we've killed deer out of before. But,
nice.
I'm still going in there mobile every time, because I didn't know if that spot was going to be, like I said, I didn't know if that scrape was going to be there, if that sign was going to be there walking up the hill.
Right. Yeah, and
if it wouldn't have been, I would have certainly needed the mobile gear to move in further and set up.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. You're finding the hottest sign. If it's not at your fixed stand from years past, you're gonna move on, which is awesome. I think people need to do more of that. And it's like, I just didn't know if part of the intrusion and pressure side of things for hunting a single property like that, if maybe, Dan Infalt just quarter it up into quarters or eighths or whatever, and just hunt a different square every time and keep them guessing. You know what I mean? Do you ever go at it like that, to where you just don't want to be pinned down?
Yeah, I do, especially if I don't know the area quite as well.
Okay.
Basically start at the front and work to the back. Yeah, but on our particular farm, I pretty much know there's not going to be a buck bedded on 85% of it.
Right.
They're going to be in one of 2 places, most likely on our farm, and then a couple other places on the neighbors.
Got it. Got it. Now, kind of shifting gears here, I want to talk about your property tours that you guys offer as a group that you've been doing. But I kind of want to skip ahead of that actually. We're kind of on this scouting thing. Now, say it's this fall, and you're on a new 40-acre farm in Michigan or wherever you're at. What sort of Is there a common denominator in terms of bedding habitat that you see in the many places you hunt? Maybe it's a certain type of red osier dogwood or cattail, or where do you find a lot of the bucks that you're after bed on the different properties you hunt? Maybe it's regionalized, but I'm just curious.
Uh, in my experience, it's always where there's no people and where there's a fair amount of habitat diversity.
Okay.
And I mean, that can change so drastically even within a property. I mean, let's just take the farm there that we've been talking about there at Dad. The satellite bedding that this buck came out of is not thick. It's basically a ridge that drops into a little creek down below, and there's one little side of this ridge, the southeast side of the ridge, that has got a little bit higher stem count on the point of it. And it's only about 1/8 of an acre in size on the point of this open, mature hardwood ridge. And there's just that high stem count right there, where a few trees have fallen over the years or whatever, creates a little bit of thicker cover in comparison to the rest of the mature timber around it. And those bucks will get in that stuff and they'll watch down below them, on a westerly type wind or a southerly type wind down to that creek bottom. And that's where this deer came from. In contrast, you go 300 more yards on the other side where there's cedars and CRP mixed in, and it is a much larger bedding area. I'm talking like 5-6 acres in size, and there's always bucks bedded in that thing. I mean, it seems like there always is, but I do see them occasionally in that other bedding. It's just so different. You're talking on one property, slightly different habitat. One bedding area may hold 10 deer in it, including a big buck. The other bedding area may hold 1 deer or 0 deer. And
Right.
That's the bedding area that this buck came out of that I shot. So it's hard for me to give you a general answer. It's always where there's no human scent and there's some type of habitat diversity there. For example, a lot of people will go down south and they'll look at a sea of pine thicket, that's a 6-7-year-old clear cut, for example, and then they planted pines in there. And the whole thing is just thick as all get out. Like you can't see 10 feet in that stuff. And people down there think that those bucks just go out and live in the middle of that. And they don't, because there's no diversity in the middle of it. It's just thick pine. It's grown up with grass and stuff, and the deer can barely even get through it at a certain point. They're going to be on the edges. They're going to be in a spot where there's a mature tree standing up out in the middle of it, something. And it could be a hard transition line from one habitat type to the next, or it could literally be 2 oak trees that they didn't cut out in the middle of that clear cut. And that's the diversity that the deer is looking for, or a tiny pond out in the middle of it. I mean, you're talking about bedding areas that may hold only 1 deer and bedding areas that may hold multiple deer, down an edge or something like that. But the trick is always looking for some kind of habitat diversity. I mean, even in cattails, what you hear Impulse and the honeybees guys talk about all the time, they're not just going out in the middle of a sea of cattails. There's always a tree out there that the deer's bedded against. There's always some kind of mixture of brush or something on the end of those islands, whether it's dogwood or whatever that they're going to be bedded in. There's always some sort of habitat diversity right there where they're laying at. and it's going to change depending on the part of the country that you're in. But that's not to say that it's difficult to find. You know, you just have to look at the habitat types that exist in your area and then start finding spots where they converge on a small and large scale.
I think that was awesome. Well said, dude. That was the diversity you mentioned, whether it's even like a pond or a lone oak in the middle of a pine, clear cut or whatever. That's awesome. That's good stuff there. Now, so say you have, maybe it's the Minnesota swamp or the southern pine. After it was cut, they planted them in there. Where are you starting? You mentioned, trying to find some edge within something like this, some diversity. How would a regular Joe Blow like us go out there and find that? I know you guys harp on this all the time, but this is really good stuff.
Yeah, we're just looking at transitions, just habitat edge. And that's the first thing that we'll do. It's like we'll just, we'll stick with the southern type stuff to start here because it's an easy example.
Cool.
So you've got hardwoods, a big block of hardwoods and a big block of planted pine cut over that's 5 years old. You basically got some open hardwoods and you got some super thick planted pines. You just walk that transition line where the two of them mix together until you start cutting deer sign. And then start following their trails back into the thick stuff or back into the open timber. And you're going to eventually run into bedding. Sometimes it'll be within 20, 30 yards of that transition line. Other times it's going to be much, much further where there's always going to be some type of habitat mixing going on.
Right.
For example, if you're walking up one of those transition lines and there's a small little drainage coming out of the planted pine where there's just slightly different growth in it, like there's trees growing up along the edge of that drainage that are, a little bit older than the pines. Maybe there's a few hardwoods mixed in. And I'm talking about a drainage that's, 2 foot wide. If it's coming out of those planted pines and there's different habitat growing right there, there's probably going to be a deer trail coming out right there. And if you follow it in there, you're going to find bedding. They're going to be right there where that stuff mixes together. So that's always what our first step is. Well, I guess I should take a step back. Our first step is identifying where the hunting pressure is. Like, where do the people that hunt the property, public or private, hunt? And how do they access the property? When do they hunt the property? And then we map all that out, and then we go and scout the transitions away from those spots, or the transitions that could be observing those spots, or the ones that those guys have ignored. If I point to a transition on a map and I'm like, do you hunt right here? And they say, yeah, we got 3 stands over there. We hunt that area all the time. Then I'll ask them what they've seen right there in the way of mature bucks, and I'll make a note of it, but we're usually then going somewhere else because they're already hunting there.
Yeah, so you got to get creative with your own access once you find some places that are off the beaten path, is what you're saying.
Yeah, you got to think of it like if you're hunting mature bucks specifically, you got to think of it like as soon as you step foot on that property, anywhere that you go, that deer is going to have the potential to eventually figure out where you're at.
Right.
And maybe not what you're doing necessarily, but he's going to figure out where you're at. He may come across your scent trail 4 days later, but
sure,
they're going to know what that smell is. And they just don't bed where that smell exists. Like if you have a tree stand that looks like it's in a perfect spot right over a nice food plot in the center of the property, if you're up in that food plot checking trail cameras every 2 weeks, they are not going to bed right next to it. They might bed somewhere where they can observe you walking in there.
Right.
But they dang sure ain't just going to lay there, within 100 yards after you go in and out, in and out, in and out, and then walk out in front of your tree stand and you shoot them. I mean, I shouldn't say that they won't, because there's certainly exceptions, but it's rare.
Right.
Most of the really big bucks that we harvest anywhere are first time fits in some place where you're catching them off guard, you're catching them by surprise. You're in an area where there's nobody else. Especially the really big bucks.
Sure. Now you guys seem to use mostly observation type movements. I don't see you guys using a whole lot of trail cameras. Now, once you find these spots, are you just setting up where you think the best sign is and then try to get eyes on something and then sort of move from there? Or how are you going about with observing these areas and trying to key in on where to put your stands?
Most of the time we're going in to an area and we've got, a number of bedding locations in mind as we're going in. And if it's in more open type terrain, if we're dealing with CRP grass or marsh or something like that, or even ag with bedding surrounding it, if we can cover 3 or 4 of those bedding areas with our eyes from an observation stand or from an observation point, whatever, then that's what we'll do. We'll just get to the best spot where we can get a good vantage on all those different bedding locations and watch them, and then move in from there. Now, if the cover is thicker where we don't have that advantage, then we got to go in there with stands on our back and just hunt the sign as you're going into the bedding areas. But it's still the same principle applies.
Okay.
You're still going from bedding A to bedding B to bedding C, and if we're getting, as we're getting closer, we're getting super quiet and we're easing in there, and that's what we're looking for. And it may only be one set of big tracks coming out. There may not be a rub, there may not be a scrape, but if you see a set of big tracks coming in and out, I mean, maybe it's a rub alone. I'm just using examples here.
Right.
Because the spectrum is so wide on what you can come across when you're going in to hunt like that, when you're going in to hunt a bedding area. Like, I mean, I've walked past a set of big tracks that were going in and coming out on the same exact trail that were super fresh. There wasn't another deer track on the trail. And I've walked 30 yards past that point, and I thought, man, maybe I should have just sat that. And I've blown a giant buck out of that bedding area.
Yeah.
And he was the only deer. That was his track. That was the deer that was in there. And if I would have set up on that trail instead of walking an extra 30 yards, there's a very good chance I would have at least seen him.
Right.
So it all varies. And we've definitely made that mistake multiple times where we cross sign that's on the edge of a bedding area and we're like, yeah, it's not quite that heavy, because we've seen it from both ends of the spectrum, where you're hunting a bedding area where there's one buck in there and that's the only deer in there, and he's the buck that you want to shoot. And on the flip side, we've hunted bedding areas where there's 15 bucks in one of them,
Right.
And there's just sign everywhere, every tree ripped up, and there's tracks on tracks, and it's just a zoo in there, as you can imagine, with that many bucks being in one bedding area. But the thing is that it depends on what area you're hunting. If you're hunting a low density area, or if you're hunting a specific buck or whatever, all is going to depend on, your setup. But the thing is, and I heard Dan Impalt say this a number of years ago, and the light bulb went off. He has a lot of those moments where he says something and you're like, oh, wow, that makes a lot of sense. But he said, you gotta hunt hot sign when hot sign is hot, and if you walk past it, then you burned it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's pretty basic. That's pretty well true. Like, if you get to a spot and you walk past that sign, you don't set up on it, then you might as well just go to the next one that you got in mind. because you're already leaving your scent there. You can't just go check it out and then go to the next one, then go to the next one and be like, well, I'll just go right back to where I initially started. That does work from time to time, but more often than not, you're burning that area when you're going through it. And if you're worried about doing that, the best thing you can do is stage hunt in there and just set up on the first one, hunt the first one the first day, then move to the second one the next day, then move to the third one the next day. And maybe the bedding areas are big enough that you can hunt different exits around them. So maybe you're hunting the same bedding area on days 2, 3, and 4, just different exits around the bedding area. That makes sense?
Yes.
Definitely. And yeah, I want to hit something that you mentioned that the same thing happened to me this last year, and I have a question for you on how maybe you would have attacked the situation differently. So I was scouting down the edge of this gigantic cornfield, and there's a woodlot downwind of me, and the cornfield is upwind of me, and the cornfield is downwind of me. So I'm walking this edge, getting back there to hang a camera in the middle of the day, and I came across these big tracks coming out into the cornfield and back in. And I walked about 5 feet by them, and I stopped. I'm like, man, that's a really good sign. And Dannon fault going off in my head, just like you said, you burned it. I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'll sneak in here then. I'll see this sign, I'll cut this trail, and I'll go in and see what I come across. And I tell you what, I walked 10 feet into the woods and blew a big chocolate horn 10-pointer that was bedded, 30 yards off the cornfield. I mean, he had me pegged from when I walked by, first of all, and then I start going in after him, and, he blew out. Now, when you first saw those tracks, would you have just froze, maybe backed up 10 feet and climbed the first tree, or what would you have done differently there, or is that just kind of a tough one?
Well, the first thing you got to assess where the nearest bedding is, and are those tracks going to or from bedding?
Okay.
And obviously, like I said, as we're getting closer towards the bedding that we've either scouted or the suspected bedding where we believe them to be, if those tracks are going in and out of an area of interest like that, then no, we're not going to go past them. If we cut them right there, we may stand in the trail that they're on and mess around right there in that spot, but we're going to make sure we can shoot that spot because that's the last spot where we left our scent.
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. If we cut the sign that we're looking for right then and there, we're setting up. And we do look around. Don't get me wrong. It's not one of those deals where you see it and, it's like radioactive or whatever. You turn around and back off of it.
Yeah.
You've got to look around to figure out where your best setup is going to be. But we're always very careful. Like there's two of us, for example, that are usually in the woods together. Somebody's filming and somebody's hunting. And when we get to that point, usually we don't both go to walking around anymore. One of us will stop and the other one will tiptoe around in a circle, and just assess the setup, the sign, the correct tree or the correct bush or whatever it is that we're getting ready to go to get into. Sometimes it's super easy to figure out, and sometimes you got to get real creative. But the point is that you want to shoot that spot where you see those tracks.
Got it. Yeah.
If it's on an exit trail leading in and out of bedding.
And apparently that was what that was. I didn't know the bedding was that close. I definitely know now. That's for darn sure. Now, if you blow one out like that, are you leaving him for how long before you jump back at him, or are you coming in from the other way, or what's your next thought? I mean, he didn't blow, but he kind of trotted away a little bit, and I thought he got me. But I mean, maybe a week from now, am I good, or is it just like move on?
It all depends.
Okay.
All depends on the nature in which that you spook them.
Okay.
Most of the time, they're coming right back to that same general area, but maybe not the exact bed. However, that is by no means a rule. We've had them come back to the same exact bed.
Okay.
The very next day.
Wow. Bump and dump, huh?
Yeah, I mean, the same bed. We just hunted it from a different side the next day. and he just came out the other way. You know, but that all has to do with how you spook them. You know, when we spooked this buck that I'm talking about, he took off out of there, and he had no idea what the heck we were. He just heard us walking close to him and took off, and he bounded about 40 yards away and then stopped and turned around, and we were ducked down in the cover by then. He couldn't tell what we were, and he couldn't smell us. But he just eased off out of there. And we didn't see him again that night, but he was right back in there the very next day with our scent in there and everything. It's almost kind of like a lot of times they give you a get out of jail free card. You can go in there and you can figure out what the hell's going on, and you can trump all over it. But it's that consistent intrusion, whatever it is, that they get wise to.
Yep.
And you got to think, I mean, they're living their whole life out there. They got stuff that's bugging them, you know, whether it's a cat or a coyote or a human or whatever. But if there's any level of consistency to that pressure, they're going to leave that spot. They're going to go find a better one somewhere. You know, if they just get surprised like that out of one, they're going to go back a lot of the time. Now, the question is how soon, and nobody knows. It's all just kind of a crapshoot. Sometimes they don't come back. Now, if they smell you and they take off out of there like a bat out of hell, they may not come back.
Yeah.
They may go, I mean, they're not just going to go run to the next county, but they may not be in that exact bed again. They may be in a slightly different bedding area the next time that you go in there to hunt them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I would definitely keep hunting them.
Yeah. Yeah, coming across a buck like that in Michigan where I hunt, then that was I went in there about 2 weeks later on the next cold front. I gave him a lot of time. I probably should have just jumped on him the next day or whatever, but I gave him a lot of time. I went back in there from a different angle and didn't see him. Saw another nice buck, but there's definitely something to that. And I like how you guys are super aggressive in that point where he's here now, so don't wait 2 weeks, right? So like hunt him now. If you blow him out, determine how you blew him out. If he's gone, he's gone, move on. If not, hunt him again, and don't wait for something else to screw up. You know, get in there. And you guys are always super aggressive, which pays off, I think.
Yeah, it's worked really well for us. The more we put our foot on the gas, the better we've done, and the more big bucks we've seen. But you got to remember too, it's always a process. You're hunting with a bow a lot of the time, and you're trying to kill a mature buck. Like, a lot of luck has got to go your way in order for you to kill one of them.
Yes, sir.
So you've got to go in there planning to kill one every time. But what you end up finding is all the intel that you're gathering, you're just building this huge portfolio of information on that particular property, maybe on that particular deer, whatever. That particular situation that day may, you may see that again down the road. It may not be next year. It may not be the year after that. But 3 years later, when the crop rotation comes around and when the acorns are falling just like they were that day, you may encounter the same situation, and you may run across a similar sign in that spot. That kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier with that buck on Dad's farm there back home. Like I said a while ago, there's not always a scrape in that spot. I haven't seen one there for 3 or 4 years, but as soon as I saw it, I was like, last time there was one right here, I had a huge buck come to it. And I remembered that from 4 years prior to that, and I messed it up back then. But this time I got set up in the correct spot, and he happened to come to that scrape. Obviously, it doesn't work like that every time, but you're slowly building that information every single time that you go out there. Because the whitetail hunting is incredibly situational.
Right.
Situations are gonna change, week to week, year to year on a given property. And the more of them that you can put yourself in, the more adaptable you'll be. when it comes to going in and setting up on the sign like that.
Awesome.
Well, that's excellent information.
Awesome.
Appreciate you going into detail on all that, Aaron. Well, we want to be respectful of your time, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit here and want to hear about the property visits and property tours you guys have been doing. I checked out the latest videos. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we do a number of consulting trips every year. I wish we could do more of them because they're a lot of fun. And we usually just we get a piece of private land to go on in a particular area. We've done one down south. We've done them in Missouri and Iowa, and Minnesota, and Ohio, and I'm probably leaving the state out somewhere too. But they're really fun. We sign up about 15 to 25 people to come out. And then we basically just show everybody our process for hunting the new property. I mean, we do a little bit of map scouting on the areas before we get there, but mostly it's all just from the start. That's the way we want it to be. We want people to get there and be in the same shoes that we're in. You know, like we just got here, boots on the ground, and we have no idea what we're dealing with. Like, what is the progression that you go through in order to figure this place out? And it usually takes about a day or so, you know, scouting. We'll scout all morning and scout all afternoon, and folks will have questions throughout the day. It's a good time, though. And we always focus on new private areas somewhere. And it usually is just somebody that volunteers their property.
Sure.
You know, as a workshop host.
Right. So mainly you're just going into the scouting and figuring out where you're going to hunt that property. Do you get into any of the habitat advice, any type of, maybe, you know, they could make a change here, make a change there?
We do a little bit, but, you know, we're not biologists or land managers or anything. I mean, that's not really where our skill is. And I don't want to, you know, come across like I'm, you know, just BSing somebody. There may be some improvements that we might suggest, but usually we're referring them to a land manager of some kind.
Right.
If that's what they're wanting to do, you know.
Now, somebody go ahead, you can finish your thought.
We do. I guess we definitely get into habitat types and that sort of thing when we're there, but our focus is mostly on the woodsmanship side of it and hunting and identifying the existing bedding areas.
Okay. Now, these people that are volunteering their farms, do you have a minimum size or a type that you have to put these on?
No, not really. We kind of take each one as its own thing, and we just look for what's going to be the best for us. I mean, we try to find areas that have got plenty of diversity and where we can get into a lot of different hunting situations for the people attending the workshop. And then in exchange for them, you know, hosting the property there, they pay us a consulting fee to essentially break down their farm from what we learn from it, you know. So we'll map everything out and send back to them and go through the process, you know, via maps. That way, because we'll break up into 2 or 3 different groups throughout the day just to cover as much ground as we can, get into as many different situations as we can, and then we'll share everything we learn with the landowners, obviously.
Okay.
And then everybody that's there.
And what time of year are you doing those, Aaron? I mean, you have one coming up, or are you all done with those from the spring scouting right after hunting season, or when do you do those?
We're pretty much done right now. We got too many other irons in the fire at the moment. I wish we didn't, because those are a lot of fun. We the last couple of years we've done them in like January, February, March. And then, of course, turkey season cranks up, and we can't get any of them done until June. And this year we we did the one in Minnesota at the beginning of June. So I think we did 4 or 5 this year, and that's probably about what we'll do next year too.
Okay.
Probably what we're shooting for.
Now, you mentioned some irons in the fire, and what's new with you guys? What's cool and exciting you can share with us? Anything cool coming up that we should watch out for?
Yeah, I mean, we're playing in the Deer Tour and the Public Land Challenge right now.
Okay.
So I'm starting to get into the scheduling of the fall, which is exciting. Like, we're going to start in early September, late August, and then run clear through, the end of January.
Wow.
We're going to be hunting lots of new states.
Okay.
And we might even be up in Michigan.
Yeah, buddy. That'd be a great
that should
time.
Be fun.
Yeah. Yeah, that'll be a good challenge, no doubt. I know that, and you guys are always up for a good challenge, though, so.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you're just constantly building you're building on everything that you're doing. It's a learning process. You're pulling something from every place that you go. And that's what we like the most about what we do, is just getting together with your buddies and trying to figure stuff out, different situations. And it's just like light bulbs going off all the time, because you're just constantly challenging yourself with something new. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I really enjoy watching them as well on your YouTube. Now, before we wrap this up, is there anything else that we missed tonight that you want to get into, or anything at all?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we've been talking about habitat quite a bit, and I don't have a ton of great, experience or feedback from the land management side of things for your listeners. But the one thing that I would say is that has benefited me personally has just been figuring out where the buck's bed on your property as it is. And remember that it may be a small, subtle change like we were talking about earlier. It may be a very tiny spot that a mature buck chooses to bed in versus a enormous bedding area. It can change so much. So when you're doing the habitat improvements, try to keep that in mind. They have to have that diversity. So chances are that whatever you have on your property is good habitat. You may just need to tweak something subtly to get it, to improve it, so to speak, from a bedding standpoint. Does that make sense?
For sure.
Yes, it does.
Like, a lot of folks think that they just got to go in and do a complete overhaul, and what ends up happening is they go in, say they have a farm that's full of open timber. Well, they go in and they TSI the entire thing, and now 10 years later it's all thick. Well, all you've done is flipped it over.
Right.
All you did was went from open to all thick, instead of strategically placing little thick spots in that open timber and creating these little pockets of diversity.
Right.
You've just created, the same monster, except on the other side of the spectrum.
Very interesting point, for sure. I think a lot of our listeners can relate to that. Definitely. I know I can. Well,
and
Aaron,
I've seen that happen some places at times, where folks were just, and I thought it the same way when I was growing up. I'm like, well, a bedding area is just a thick area, there's nothing
big swamp,
strategic about
whatever.
it.
Yeah.
Right. So let's just make as much thick stuff as we can, and then before you know it, the whole thing is thick, and there's not enough diversity in there for deer to bed and live. And that's what they gotta have. They want to have all those different habitat types mixing together.
I like it.
Great point.
Now, one more question for you. You hunt out of, I always ask this question, it's kind of a random question, but what's your favorite type of tree to hunt out of? Species.
species of tree?
Yeah, do you have one?
I like pines a lot and white oaks.
Cover.
Yeah.
Lots of cover in the white oaks usually, and they hold their leaves, and pines are good there. Plus the acorns.
Yeah, they got a lot of horizontal limbs and stuff up there to help break up your outline, and they're usually straight enough that you don't have to, go wild to get up in the thing. But to be honest, the best tree is the one that's located 15 yards from the trail that you're going to shoot the buck on. It doesn't really matter if the thing is a willow that's the size of your calf or if it's a oak tree that's 5 feet wide. I mean, and that's another thing. And I won't go too far down the rabbit hole on this one.
You're
but
good.
I've seen that happen with folks a lot of times where they were like, well, this tree up here is a really good tree for a stand. And you look at it and you're like, well, where do you see all the bucks? And they're like 80 yards that way. I'm like, well, then I wouldn't hunt out of this tree anymore. I would hunt 80 yards that way.
Yeah.
I don't care what tree is over there. If there's not a tree, then sit on a bucket or figure something out. Like, you ain't going to be able to move him over here to your favorite tree. But, yeah, anyway.
No doubt.
It's kind of a random question, but you'd be surprised. We get a lot of interesting answers out of that and really some eye-opening stuff. So I always like to ask it.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Aaron, we really appreciate you coming on. We want to give you a chance to let everybody know where they can find you, websites, however else, YouTube. You want to let our listeners know how to get a hold of you.
Yeah, no problem, guys. You can follow all of our stuff at the Hunting Public. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Amazon. And then thehuntingpublic.com.
Fantastic.
Awesome. Well, Aaron, thank you very much again. Look forward to hopefully seeing you in the show circuit this year and maybe running into you in the woods here up in Michigan. You never know.
Sounds good, guys. Thanks for having me.
All right, Habitat Podcast number 55 is in the books, guys. Aaron Warbritton from the Hunting Public. Thanks for coming on, brother. Really enjoyed the conversation with you, and I know Brian did too. And thank you to the listeners for coming back once again. Always appreciate it. Go ahead and give us a review online if you can. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, habitatpodcast.com. We're finalizing that new website where we'll have hats and shirts and some decals available very soon. So hang in there, check us out online, send us some cool pictures of your food plots or whatever you're working on these days. I got a cool video of a homemade crimper the other day from a guy named Tommy, so that's pretty cool. I'll share that with the Facebook group here soon. And if you're new to the podcast, you can find us at habitatpodcast.com, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, iHeartRadio, anywhere you can find a podcast online, we should be on it. So if we're not, let us know and we'll get on it. So, guys, thank you very much. Get ready for deer season coming up here. Shoot your bows, finish up them food plots, hang those stands, and just, enjoy your farms. I'd like to thank 5-2 Outdoors, Killer Food Plots, Packer Max Cultipackers, The Habitat Hook, Michigan Whitetail Pursuit, and Dip That Hydrographics for your support in the Habitat Podcast. We couldn't do it without the friendships and partnerships that we've made with you guys, so we thank you for that. Everybody else, be safe, and we'll be back soon with another episode of the Habitat Podcast. Take care.